Welcome to Silo Presents Legends and Lore. Today's topic is the Ancient Ram Inn located in Wotton-Under-Edge, England. If you're a fan of the paranormal, then you've likely heard of this place before. The inn is the oldest building in Wotton-Under-Edge, England, and is considered by many as the most haunted place in Britain. The Ghost Adventures team from the Travel Channel visited the location in 2009 to conduct their own paranormal investigation. Along with them, hundreds of other ghost hunting amateurs and self-proclaimed experts have visited the location in order to conduct their very own paranormal investigation in hopes of finding evidence of ghosts and the afterlife. Let's walk you through the history of this location, along with some of the spooky experiences that those brave enough to spend the night have witnessed. Before I get into the meat and potatoes that is the history and haunts of the Ancient Ram Inn, I do want to mention that during my research, I did run into quite a few inconsistencies on some of the history of this location, but I've tried my absolute best to get you an accurate depiction of this location's history and haunts. If at any point I mentioned something that you have found to not be true or accurate, please let me know in the comments down below and provide a source if you can. Alright, let's get into it. Originally built in 1145 on top of an over 5,000-year-old pagan burial ground, the Ancient Ram Inn, which is now nearly 900 years old today, was first used as a keeping house for workers, slaves, and masons that were tasked with helping, and I say helping loosely, in the construction of the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, which actually still stands today. During the construction of the church, streams that went through the area the church was being built on were diverted towards the inn. Many believe that the redirecting of these streams led to an accumulation of dark energy in and around the inn. Once construction of the church had made decent progress, the inn went from a keeping house for workers, slaves, and masons to the home of the church's first vicar by the name of Garanus. Now, if you don't know what a vicar is, because I sure didn't, a vicar is a priest working with or in place of the pastor of a parish. And if you don't know what a parish is, which again, I sure didn't, a parish is a small administrative district, typically having its own church and a priest or pastor. Both of those definitions are from Google, so if I was incorrect, you should just take it up with Google. Anyways, I digress. The priest stayed in one of the many rooms inside of the Ancient Ram Inn, but his room in specific is thought to be the same one that is now known as the infamous Bishop's Room. More on that later. After the church no longer claimed ownership of the building, it was purchased and owned by Maurice de Both in 1350. Maurice de Both used the building as a sort of rental property style complex, leasing the property to numerous tenants over the years. The property stayed under the ownership of Maurice de Both for over 170 years. At least, on paper, since humans don't live that long. It is thought that sometime in the 1500s, the inn was used by local wool traders since tenterhooks have been found within the inn. Tenterhooks are these hooked nails that are used in a machine called a tenter, and that machine is used in the wool making process. Wool traders were not the only people who potentially occupied the inn during this time period though, as during the height of the witch hunt of the 1500s, a woman who had been accused of witchcraft and was set to go to trial, which I'm sure would have been a fair and just trial, understandably fled the trial and took refuge inside one of the many rooms inside of the inn. Now unfortunately she would soon be discovered, and her trial, like the many unjust trials faced by women during these witch hunts, would lead to her death as she was set to burn at the stake during a public execution. The room in which she was believed to have taken refuge is now appropriately called the Witch's Room. I do have to add though that some sources claim that she lived on the property and called it her home, and other sources claimed that she used the property as nothing more than a location to hide and take refuge. Which one, if either, is true, we may never know. In 1694, the building took on the name the Old Tan House, and it was owned by the then town mayor, Jonathan Nelms. In 1724, the building took on a different name, the Horsepool House, and finally in 1820, it gained its current name, the Ram Inn. There are records showing that the inn also likely donned the name the Old Sun anytime between the late 1690s and the early 1800s, but I couldn't really find any concrete date or time period for when it held this name. From 1820 to 1965, the Ram Inn operated as a pub, serving local brews and even their own water that they sourced from a nearby spring. Remember those redirected streams I told you about earlier? In 1965, the Ram Inn forever closed its doors as a pub. Vacant for 3 years and facing demolition, a man by the name of John Humphreys purchased the home in 1968 to save it from destruction. But he was only allowed to purchase if he agreed to never operate the inn as a pub again. This was due to local brewery competition concerns. John agreed, but even then, the cellar of the inn, where, brewery stuff happens, was filled in and closed off to ensure that John kept his word. John ended up purchasing the property for around 2,000 British pounds, which is a little over 34,000 British pounds today when accounting for inflation, or if you use American dollars like me, a little over $45,000 today and around $2,600 back then. John initially wanted to use the property as a guest house but decided against it and made the property his home instead. This is where the trouble began. I didn't mention this earlier, but I feel like this detail may be part of the reason for the vast amount of paranormal activity in this location. Aside from the inn being nearly 900 years old and being built on top of a 5,000-year-old pagan burial ground, which you would think that on its own would be enough for a haunting, the inn was also built on top of the intersection point of 2 ley lines. Now, if you don't know what ley lines are, I'll probably just confuse you with my jumbled definition, so I'm just going to go ahead and read you the one directly from Wikipedia. Ley lines are straight alignments drawn between various historic structures and prominent landmarks. The idea was developed in early 20th century Europe, with ley line believers arguing that these alignments were recognized by ancient societies that deliberately erected structures along them. I tried finding a decent picture of these ley lines, but I swear I could not find a single example with decent image quality that didn't look like some kind of wobbly mess, so if you're watching this on YouTube, here's one anyway. Regardless, one of the ley lines that crosses over the ancient Ram Inn also happens to cross over Stonehenge, and the other over Glastonbury Tor. Both of these locations are thought to be powerful spiritual sites, and since the ancient Ram Inn is located on the ley lines intersecting with both of these locations, it is thought that their spiritual energy is enhancing the paranormal activity at the inn, potentially even creating a portal of sorts. Now back to John Humphreys. The first night that John decided to stay at the inn would prove to be a nightmare. While sleeping in the comfort of his own bed, he claims that some otherworldly being grabbed his arm and dragged him out of bed, essentially launching him across the room. John would claim to be the victim of terrifying paranormal attacks time and time again by what he believes to be an incubus and a succubus. An incubus is a male sex demon, and a succubus is a female sex demon, to put it in layman's terms. But not to worry, because I do plan on going over different types of ghosts, spirits, and demons in future podcast episodes in way more detail, so make sure that you stick around for those. John also claimed to constantly hear banging on windows that would follow him from room to room, believing it to be poltergeist activity. On one occasion, he attempted to place the painting of a pastor on the wall of a stairwell, but was immediately met with the wrathful spirits of the inn, essentially telling him no, absolutely not. Doors began to open and slam shut repeatedly, and the sound of banging coming from nearly every window in the house could be heard. John wasn't the only person experiencing these paranormal events. His daughter, Caroline Humphreys, also lived at the inn until the age of 13. While she lived at the inn, she stayed in the attic bedroom. The attic bedroom is thought to be where hundreds of years prior, the daughter of a former innkeeper was tragically murdered. At one point, Caroline witnessed her bedside cabinet get thrown down the stairs, along with other strange paranormal happenings that she attributed to a poltergeist as well. Even with the constant paranormal activity and reported attacks by seemingly demonic forces, John often enjoyed inviting locals to the inn from the local pub after they had closed for the night. During these late-night gatherings, he would play jazz and the locals would dance and chat. Some of these visitors would also claim to see and experience strange paranormal activity, but Caroline Humphreys isn't too sure how well their claims can be trusted since they were likely intoxicated. John would also host multiple events at the site year-round, essentially making it a community hub. John stopped hosting these gatherings and events in late 1978, possibly early 1979. The longer that John stayed at the inn and the more visitors that came and went, the more notorious the site became for its paranormal events. Things were so bad at times that John was known to always carry around a Bible for his protection. John was of course curious of the history of the location, and while he was conducting his constant repairs and restoration efforts, he also felt the need to do a little digging. Literally. In a room known as the men's kitchen, John gave a group of local ghost hunters permission in 1997 to remove parts of the concrete floor in search of the cellar that I mentioned earlier was sealed off. Now find that cellar here, he did not. Instead, he found the remains of a woman and child who were buried here next to the broken shards of an iron dagger. A local museum would then go on to analyze the iron dagger and concluded that it was likely used for ritual sacrifices. After the excavation and while on their way home, the ghost hunters got into a car crash, which many attribute to the disturbance of the gravesite just hours before. During further excavations into the home, another gravesite was found just underneath the staircase. This site contained the skeletal remains of multiple children whose lives were believed to have been taken as sacrifices. In the walls of the infamous bishop's room, they discovered a mummified cat, which is currently kept on display at the inn's living room. With a bit of history now covered, let's get a bit more into the haunts that are specific to some of the rooms at the Ancient Ram Inn. The paranormal activity is scattered around the inn, with specific sightings and events consistent within that of 6 locations at the inn. Those locations being the men's kitchen, the weaver's attic, the bishop's room, the witch's room, the Mayflower barn, and the staircase. The men's kitchen is thought to be haunted by that of a baby or a small child, a woman, and a malevolent spirit. The woman often claimed to be seen in the men's kitchen is known as the Lady in Blue, or simply Elizabeth. Elizabeth is said to have presented herself to John Humphrey's daughter Caroline on multiple occasions, and a few of those occasions introducing herself as, well, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is thought to be the ghost of a woman who was found buried just behind the bar. She is believed to have been murdered at the inn by highwaymen who were said to use the inn as a hideout hundreds of years before. The sounds of a crying baby or toddler have been heard coming from seemingly nowhere, and less commonly, the apparitions of men have been seen standing by the fireplace. John still believes that the sealed cellar is hidden underneath the men's kitchen, and that this cellar has secret tunnels that lead to the closed-off basement of a nearby church. John would refuse to continue his attempts at confirming this theory for fear he may awaken more dormant spirits. I mentioned malevolent spirits as well because at one point John would claim he was dragged across this room while he was resting. The witch's room, as briefly mentioned before, is thought to be haunted by the ghost of the woman that was accused of witchcraft and sought refuge at the inn. The witch's ghost is believed to not be aggressive and does not appear to try to harm any guests. Many of those who have stayed at the room claim to see shadows moving around quickly from the corner of their eye, objects moving, they notice temperature changes, and even occasionally see a small, crippled-looking child waving from the window. What I believe to be a strange coincidence in this room is the ghost of a black cat that is often seen or heard meowing. Some believe that this could be the familiar of the witch, but I again believe it's nothing more than a strange coincidence. There are even claims of spectral cat pee stains on the bed, which is something I never thought I would say out loud. But interestingly enough, as mentioned before, an over 500-year-old mummified cat was found within the walls of the home by Caroline Humphreys and her husband when assisting John in a cleanup of the home. And again, they keep this mummified cat in a glass display at the inn's living room. Could this cat be the same apparition of the cat often spotted in the witch's room? In some older European cultures, placing a dried or mummified cat inside your walls was done for good luck and to ward off evil spirits. Considering this mummified cat was dated to be at least 500 years old, could the fact that it was placed inside the walls back then mean that the inn was haunting people over 500 years ago as well? Now let's take a bit of a break from the inside of the inn and make our way outside, but just for a second. Now, I didn't mention this earlier because there really isn't much information around it, but just outside of the inn is thought to be the oldest original section of the ancient Ram Inn property, known as the Mayflower Barn. Originally thought to be a Saxon church, John Humphreys was known to use the barn in some of his events and gatherings. Those who visit the barn now claim to frequently spot orbs, and on occasion, if you're unlucky enough, the dark, shadowy 7 to 8 foot tall figure of a man with glowing red eyes. Those who claim to have seen this figure mention feelings of extreme fear, nausea, and headaches. This terrifying giant of an entity is thought to be that of the very person who murdered and sacrificed the children that were found buried underneath the inn. On one occasion, while he was inside the Mayflower Barn, John Humphreys was thrown in the air and pinned against a wall. This would go on to happen again on another occasion when an amateur 18-year-old ghost hunter entered the barn, where he was soon also thrown in the air and pinned against the wall. Needless to say, if this ghost hunter was a skeptic before, well, he sure isn't now. Now back inside the inn we go. The Weaver's Attic is the room that Caroline Humphreys occupied when she was a kid and lived in the home. As mentioned earlier, on one occasion, her bedside cabinet was thrown down the stairs in what she attributed to poltergeist activity. Many who stay in the attic or in the room under the attic claim to hear the sounds of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The spirit mentioned before, Elizabeth, is also claimed to make an appearance here every so often. Earlier I mentioned that Elizabeth was thought to have been murdered by highwaymen. What I did not mention was that this woman is the same woman thought to be the daughter of an innkeeper here hundreds of years before. As to how she was murdered, they believe she was hanged from the ceiling in the attic. The staircase is also thought to be a place of high paranormal activity. Visitors will sometimes claim to be pushed down the stairs when walking up or down them. Some have even claimed a white mist has appeared before them while ascending or descending the staircase. Many, mainly young girls and women, claim to feel uneasy and drained when ascending the staircase and to have that energy return back to them when they are down the staircase and no longer on them. At the top of the staircase stands an old grandfather clock where a ghostly human face has been known to make an appearance on the clock face. Some believe that the pushing of people on the staircase is nothing more than the ghosts of children playing, and that this might be the very reason that mainly young girls feel uneasy and drained while they are on the staircase. Others will simply attribute this common occurrence to that of a poltergeist. And finally, we have the infamous Bishop's Room. Originally named the Berkeley Room, this is thought to be the most haunted room in the ancient Ram Inn. This room is said to be the home of the previously mentioned incubus and succubus, or at the very least, where they most often make their presence known. Those few and far between that were and are brave enough to spend a night in the room would sometimes claim to feel something climb into bed with them. This something would sometimes even pin them down and mess with its victim while they could do nothing but lie there, frozen in fear. John found this room to be so haunted that he would always knock 3 times while shouting, "Is anybody in there?" repeating this multiple times before entering the room with his Bible in hand while making the sign of the cross. John Humphreys at one point attempted an exorcism of the room with the help of former Bishop of Gloucester, Reverend John Yates, who was unsuccessful in the exorcism, claiming that it was the most evil place he had ever had the misfortune to visit. The Berkeley Room was soon renamed the Bishop's Room due to his ties with the building after the attempted exorcism. The apparitions of priests, pastors, nuns, and monks have all been known to have been seen in this room. Some have reported seeing women hanging upside down from the ceiling beams and hearing the disembodied screams of a man whose life was thought to have been taken when his head was shoved inside of a lit fireplace. Visitors who come into the room with their kind and loving dog will occasionally have their dog turn on them and begin attempts at attacking them until they leave the room. Even the ghostly figure of a Roman soldier on horseback has been seen in the room, quickly running through the walls. Objects are thrown, shadows are seen, and even a strange 4-legged creature thought to be that of a greyhound who once lived on the property has been seen running and jumping on people before disappearing into thin air. The spirit of the cat seen in the witch's room is often seen here as well. Throughout the ancient Ram Inn, there are countless amounts of paranormal experiences, reported by both guests and ghost hunters. Strange knocking on windows, doors, and walls. Disembodied voices. Sudden and unexplained feelings of weakness, sickness, or nausea. Footsteps. Sudden temperature rises and drops. Horrid smells. Orbs of light along with unexplained lights. Human and animal apparitions. Poltergeists and demonic activity. With a history dating as far back as the 12th century, it's no wonder that so much energy has been built up over the years in this nearly 900-year-old inn. John Humphreys passed away in December of 2017. He was laid to rest at a nearby church cemetery that overlooked the inn. Even in death, John felt the need to stay connected to the haunted inn that he once called home. His daughter, Caroline Humphreys, now owns the inn. From 2020 until now, she's felt the pain of running a somewhat niche tourist attraction, especially with the restrictions placed on travel during the pandemic. Caroline emphasizes that every penny earned from history buffs, tourists, and ghost hunters goes right back into the restoration and maintenance of the inn. She is currently looking at potentially opening up a new pub or restaurant at the site. She also looks to possibly open up the site to schools so that local children and teens can learn about history. If you are ever in the United Kingdom or live in the United Kingdom and want to visit one of the country's oldest buildings, potentially capture some spooky footage, and maybe even experience some paranormal activity for yourself, then you can contact the inn online for inquiries and to purchase tickets. The inn is just over 2 hours from London and about an hour and a half from Birmingham. If you are watching this from YouTube, then make sure to subscribe and hit that bell so that you are notified upon the release of new episodes. If you are listening to this from a podcasting platform, then please give me a follow for more content like this. And make sure to leave a comment letting me know what content, be it cryptids, aliens, ghosts, haunted locations, SPCs, etc., that you would like to see in the future. Also, if you are interested in reading more about the Ancient Ram Inn and its history, all of my sources are in the description down below. Stay safe, everyone.